Okay, so welcome to the W3C call for 2nd of June 2021. We'll be discussing an issue of immediate relevance, I think, for a lot of people on the call, which is how we describe facility types in a way that's useful to end users and to consuming applications. But I'll just kick off with a round of introductions in the order on my screen. Jamie, can you say who you are, please?
Is it me, James Clayson?
Oh, sorry, I was aiming for Jamie rather than James. But
oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Jamie from Playfinder.
Shervin?
Yeah, hi, I'm Shervin, software developer at Played.
Fantastic. Helen?
Hi everybody, I'm Helen and I'm a project manager at Schoolspace.
Fantastic. Tom?
Hi guys, Tom, founder at Played.
Siv?
Guys, software developer I'm in.
And now James Clayson.
Hi, James, head of products at Played.
Fantastic. And Nick?
Hello, Nick from I'm in. Just in time for the intro. Sorry about that.
Yep, no, perfect timing. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is, I think, sort of an urgent question for some people on the call about describing facility types and activities. And I think on the last call, we arrived at a good mechanism for just for describing facilities, I think, and aspects of facilities like surface and whether they're indoor and outdoor. I think we came up with a good syntax for that will work for everybody. I think the remaining problem, and I'll make sure, first of all, that I'm summarizing this correctly. I'll just hop onto the slides here. Oh. And we're joined by Nish. Nish, can you just do a quick intro for yourself, please?
Hello, Nish from I'm in.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see here. Okay, is everybody seeing the presentation?
Yeah.
Yep. Cool.
Yep.
Okay, so my first sense check is, am I correctly summarizing the last call, which was that if we have a kind of more or less bag of surface types and facility types, that will work for the very free-form nature of facility type description. There had been experiments with more hierarchical and more principled ways of organizing this kind of information that I think got overcomplicated and hard to implement. And then with a separate attribute for indoor or outdoor status. The point we got hung up on, I think, was that there's a mismatch between facility type, which could be anything from the surface of a court or the nature of a venue like a squash court or something like that, whether or not something has got astroturf or grass. And there's a mismatch between that and what kind of activities can be played on it. This is where the complexity tended to emerge previously, because in one sense, football pitch with a 3G surface is one description, but on the other hand, there's two separate concerns that are being represented, one of which is the surface and one of which is a kind of activity. So the point that we got to is, I think we already have a pretty good way of describing activities. That's the activity list. We are in a position to define a fairly simple structure for facility types, a fairly loose structure for facility types. But the problem is lining those up, that end users might well search in terms of the activity type and arrive at a facility rather than searching by the facility type. And how do you make sure that those two things are sensibly aligned with each other? And there's a kind of tension there, because if you're a facility provider, you don't want to tag a space or a facility with every single activity that you could possibly undertake in it, particularly if it's a multi-purpose space like a gymnasium or something like that. It gets absurd. itemizing the 600 odd activities in the activity list, indexed against one space. On the other hand, there's a strong possibility that consumers are going to search in those kinds of terms, and that somebody who's looking for a place to do karate might be thinking in terms of karate. And in fact, there's lots of spaces that would satisfy that criterion, but they've been unlikely to be tagged with, dojo or whatever the appropriate term would be. And then there's a difficulty that, well, who else can provide that mapping? Really, the information about that relationship properly belongs with the activity provider or with a facility provider, who presumably will have some restrictions in place about how a space can be used. But that does put a huge burden on the provider. So I think that's where we got to, was the difficulty of lining those up. And there was a little activity on the thread yesterday and today, looking at this in more detail. And that was, oh, hold on, and something 3 minutes ago. Okay, I don't feel bad that I didn't see this.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I had that on my call at the last call. I just unpressed the submit button. Sorry about
that. So from Matt, representing Spots, I don't know how to say it, Spots, we had kind of a problem of hierarchy. So you've got, one space, it can be subdivided. I think actually that's fairly easy to deal with in the current specifications. I mean, you have to represent these kinds of subdividable spaces multiply in the data feeds, and your own system has to coordinate what combinations are possible and viable. But I don't think that's particularly a problem addressed in this comment. Jamie, I think your proposal, if I'm understanding it correctly, is really that the data consumer or the data management system is happy to do that mapping, that's a job for consultation between the data end publisher and the activity provider. Is that a fair summary, Jamie?
Yeah, that's what we do on Playfinder.
Right.
And yeah, full automation would be fantastic. But we also do want to curate to a degree what goes on Playfinder. So I think that we're happy to take that step.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it's just the main problem is the kind of how to describe the facilities and space hire and things like that. Okay,
so that correlation then is done, yeah, essentially manually, but that's an acceptable overhead given the complexity of the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Tom, since I'm afraid I didn't see this comment, would it be just possible for you to summarize your intention in that comment there?
Yeah, sorry, it came in quite late in the day. But yeah, I just thought I would get it down so it would be easier to describe. And Shervin or James, please butt in if it's I'm describing it wrong. But I just wanted to, I think on the last call, there was that chasm or that separation between the end user experience and the provider experience. But actually, when I write down the flow, they're fairly aligned from that perspective. Like someone goes onto the venue and then selects the sport within that venue and then can book whatever the amount of courts there are. So actually, it seems like what's available now is fine for the majority of what we need to do. The challenge is around multi-use space and stuff that's outside of a sport and is more broad, like a classroom, etc. In some of the schools' work.
Okay, so looking at that 4-point flow, how it currently works. So the difficulty with the activity list, then the list of popular sports, where are you getting that from? Is that a bespoke list? So
it's from the activity list, but it's one that we've shortened based on the sports that people are using our system for, and the obvious ones, because we don't want a scenario where that list is the whole activity list and is not relevant for facilities in 90% of the cases. but yeah, it's that when it's outside on that step 2, they're selecting, I guess, a category as opposed to just a sport. So it makes sense for stuff that falls outside of sports that can be played or take place at that venue. And so we want to be able to use something that's OpenActive compliant, but then makes sense within that step 2 and is flexible enough to communicate to the end user that this space can be used for multiple other things, etc.
Right. So the requirement there is really, and I think this is something Jamie raised as a separate issue elsewhere. The requirement is really just for a generic type.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And really just one. I mean, is it just the case that if you had some tag multi-use, that would kind of do it as far as your systems were concerned?
I think so from our perspective. James, is that right?
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if we tag something as multi-use, I'm not sure how much benefit that's going to be to somebody searching.
I guess it'd be up to the other provider or us to name that something that makes sense to the end user, or give them the option to call it what they want, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure how much help I'm going to be on this call because I haven't seen this thread until recently. But so what I'll probably do is just listen in and see what's going on, see how these things relate to reach. But in terms of our points 1 to 4, that is pretty much it. At the moment, yeah, the step number 2, which is select sport, is selecting the activity. And step 3, where we've got add facilities, that's the terminology would be facility individuals, which is the courts and pitches. So I guess, yeah, somewhere in this flow, we need to be able to tag in facility types as as good as possible. Really, I'm not 100% sure how we might be able to do that just yet.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so Nick, you've got a UI here. Could you talk us through that?
Yes, not very well described. I thought that was the action I took from the last call was to do that, but maybe I misunderstood what that action was. But yeah, so I think in the last call we talked about the difference between a booking system and activity finder view of the world, and well, things that have been mentioned so far about the differences and what we might want to do to describe things. This is just demonstrating what I thought was one of the proposals that was being discussed last time. In a world where you have a facility type list, and that list is the primary list that is being used in the booking system, you can map that to activities, and then you can use it. You can have an activity search in the activity finder itself. So if you start with the bottom one here in the booking system, idea would be that you've got your particular space. That's the bottom box. You called it 3G football pitch. You've tagged it with the facility types, 7-a-side football pitch and rugby training pitch, because they're the 2 types that make sense, and a surface type as well. And that's what you've put in the booking system. So you're not actually putting football and rugby in specifically, you're putting in the types. And what that means is that facility type can also include multi-use space, classroom, dance studio, all the other types of spaces which people have. I know that Helen on this call sent another started another thread about other types, main halls, dance and drama studios, things like that. So that potentially could be what's in the facility types. And then if you go up to the first one, then that enables you to, if you so desire, but obviously there's different configurations for how this could be presented from a data consumer perspective. You could have a football drop down. You could then allow them to select what type of football pitch, if that was of interest, because that's the types that have been tagged. And you could then find those football pitches. So you've kind of got the activity that narrows down the types available for the second box. Or you could just go directly to the search by types. You could search on the second box only, or you could search first box only, football. It'll give you all types of football pitches, with maybe a secondary filter for the types. And so I suppose the main thing here is to answer what Tim kind of put on the slides around the tension. The booking system's perspective, you're only really describing the space. You're not describing the sports in any way other than you would be by describing the space. So you're saying it's a football pitch, you're saying it's a rugby training pitch. You're not necessarily saying that football and rugby can be played there, because people can use football pitches for all sorts of things. And so that's not necessarily dictating the sport that can be played. That's what the sport is a convenience for searching, and that's what's in the activity finder.
Sure. So what I'm not understanding is how that linkage gets made, right? That's just the bit that we're clear on.
This was still what I was saying before about the facility types themselves are linked to activities. So the football, the 7-a-side football pitch is in that list, is centrally managed list, is linked to the football activity, which is currently how the facility types list is structured at the moment. So there's already a linkage in the facility types list between the facility types and the activity types.
And when you say centrally managed, you mean by OpenActive?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's living. There's an alignment living in a repo, and yeah.
Yeah, so exactly. So the same group that defines the 7-a-side football pitch term also defines which activities could feasibly be played in that. Although that linkage doesn't have to be used. I suppose Jamie's point about curation, some finders might choose to just make their own link between football and the pitch types, and decide on what fits. It's there as a convenience really for people that want to make use of the data without doing that extra bit of curation work.
Right. I mean, as long as it's an optional convenience, that makes sense. I suppose. Well, I guess I'll just open it up to wider discussion first of all. I mean, what is other people's reaction to that on this call?
I mean, from our perspective, this would work actually. Minor changes, I think, but yeah, I mean, I can chat to Tom and James after the call, but yeah, I mean, it seems sensible from our side, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, me too. This is how we see it working for us.
Okay, so you'd be relying on that on that mapping existing centrally.
Yeah.
Okay, and so in the case of school space, you would probably want to tag things with classroom or multi-use or something quite generic like that then.
So one of the things that we are trying to avoid is classrooms, just for the scope of this project. Classrooms don't really fit. So we're not putting that in our data, we're trying to get it out of our data. But that multi-use bit is really, it's kind of key for us really, because we use lots of main halls and there could be 3 main halls in a school and they all have different floor types, which means they all have different activities. So it would be very difficult to put a name of an activity to any of those. So it's just giving us that option to be able to talk about what the hall is rather than what the sport is.
Okay, so I guess the difficulty there is supporting that kind of activity finder behavior gets a bit difficult because I feel like there's a potential scope for mismatches to occur where.
Sorry, Tim, so can I just check, Helen, would it be possible for a multi-use hall to tag it with football pitch and basketball courts where those facilities exist in that space?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that might solve the issue, but we're not tagging it with the different types of sport. We're not tagging it with football and basketball and yoga and I don't know, whatever else you could feasibly do in the space.
Yeah.
We're just describing the space.
Yeah. So the way I see it is that the vast majority of these would be either sports halls, of which you'd be able to tag all the sports because they've got all the different facilities for that, or outdoor pitches, which are the same. It's either a football pitch or a netball pitch, or so it's kind of that way. But a lot of these spaces have got all of those different pitches on them, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Sure.
So I guess the difficulty is that I don't know, some number between like 3 and 10 kinds of sort of generic space, I'm guessing. So there's a sort of generic outdoor pitch, there's a sort of generic sports hall, but there might be subdivisions of that, I suppose. So there might be some sports halls that, you know, for whatever reason don't have badminton markings or something. So then you'd end up with difficulties of representing that level of nuance.
Yeah, I think it needs to, we almost need to cater for the key ones that are in all of them, and then have a look at it from there. I think the vast majority of them have 5 sports that have all the markings for those 5 sports, so be quite comfortable with that.
Okay, so there's a small number of these kinds of spaces that are pretty more or less regular and predictable in that way. Okay.
And it's the same with things like dance studios. So they would have your dance, your yoga. There'd be about 4 different things that you do in that, and they all have the same type of flooring. It just gets a bit confusing with main halls because the flooring is what specifies what you can do in it.
Okay, right. Although I suppose you end up with a situation where actually, you know, it's getting like 80% represented or something like that. That, you know, if you happen to miss one of the activities, it wouldn't be perfect, but it would still be more useful than having no activities lined up against it. Yeah.
So just to understand oh, sorry, just a quick question then, Helen, on understanding that a little bit more. Are we saying that within a dance studio, because I guess I was imagining you would just tag it dance studio and then people could infer whether that would be useful for yoga. But as you say, because of the floor type, well, and you put the surface in there so that they can look at the surface type. Would you typically expect that a yoga class would be applicable in a certain type of space, in a certain type of dance studio, and not in another one, or is it?
No, I think it would go to all of them.
Okay.
To be honest, the descriptions that we'll pull through here tell you what you can have in them. So our descriptions are: this is a perfect dance studio, also suitable for yoga or something like that. So it kind of says it all over it. Yeah. Tricky, this, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I was just trying to understand whether it would ever be the case that you'd have one dance studio where you could do yoga and one dance studio where you couldn't do yoga, or something.
No, I'd say that all of them you could.
And the same with other dance types.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just trying to get at, is a dance studio, and whatever you do in it is dependent on when you turn up and what kit you brought with you in the class.
Pretty much. I'd need to confirm that there isn't any ones that I haven't seen, but I've seen about 15 that would be anything. So yeah, we just need a bit of a sense check on that. But no, it's an open empty space with the right flooring for whatever activity of that type. So with mirrors, so yeah, be fine.
Helen, could I ask a question? Would you want a marketplace to list that dance studio as applicable for yoga or dance classes, or would you just want them to be listed as dance studios and kind of people can make up their own minds?
I think it'd be better to say that they're applicable, they're dance studios, to make up your own mind. Yeah, it's hard though, that, isn't it? Which way would that work better from your side?
At the moment, we do just list the space. So for a dance studio, it would just be a dance studio. Okay. But then I've spoken to people who, are real space hire specialists, and they think from a marketing perspective, it's better to advertise the activity rather than the space. It just makes it more tangible in people's minds. However, to kind of go back on that, I would also think that if you're going to hire it for a yoga class, you're not necessarily looking to take part in that yoga class, you're looking to lead it. So it's really a yoga instructor who wants to hire a dance studio to hold their yoga class, rather than someone. It might be confusing if Payfinder, for example, were to list it as a yoga studio when we're not actually listing yoga, we're just listing the space. So I think our view at the moment is to continue listing it as a space, yeah. Which is a dance studio.
Yeah, I think from our side that would be a lot easier as well.
Okay, I mean, I guess this sounds like a fairly easy consensus then, in a sense, that if there was some kind of mapping from facility type to activity type, that was, you know, optionally used and fairly loose, that would be available for convenience, but it wouldn't be a requirement, and organizations could just skip it if they didn't want to avail themselves of that. This could be maintained by OpenActive, but with really no kind of service level agreement there, really, with no kind of guarantees about how accurate that is, for any individual organization. I guess that's the difficult part. Got a dance studio without a bar in it or something, and so you can't use it for ballet. That's just a problem that might creep in.
That's what I'd be most concerned about, is the odd ones out that just creep in and create a problem.
That's interesting though. Would you call that a dance studio? Would that be a particular type of facility? Would it be a ballet suitable dance studio, or do you know what I mean? Or would you tag it with the facility type of, you know, a ballet bar, or I don't know what you.
Again, what we do at the moment, I realise it's a bit dated, but that's in our description. So we add that at the moment in the description, has the floor type and what activities are in.
Well, I'm just wondering whether a ballet bar, or whatever the technical term is, similar to a basketball hoop, in that, you know, a sports hall can have a basketball court in it, a dance studio can have a ballet bar in it, and you're not actually saying I can do ballet in here, because certain ballet types of classes won't need that bar.
Yeah.
But obviously some will.
Yeah, I see.
I think it may be helpful to think about, you know, the activities. So on Playfinder, you know, football is an activity, but we also have got space hire as an activity, which, you know, clearly isn't strictly an activity, but it does help. You know, you don't, as mentioned, you know, if you're going to hire a dance studio, you tend to be the activity leader. So in a way, space hire is what you're actually trying to do. You're trying to hire a space to put on your activity. So I think, you know, while a sports hall can be, you know, used for basketball, football, you know, badminton, etc., and you'd want to list them as basketball, football, badminton, when you're describing space hire, then it is actually literally just the hiring of the space that you're trying to do. And so it is actually more appropriate.
Okay, I guess I feel like space hire we concluded last time doesn't live in the activity list, but if it were just in the facility type list, that's fine.
Or is it implied, actually? Is space hire just implied by the activity finder interface, as anything that you're not choosing to curate into the list of facility types that you're going to be searching for, or however you phrase it? Do you know what I mean? If all the facility types have, some of the facility types have activities tagged against them manually, or using the convenience, some of them won't. I guess because you could be looking for space hire, and you could be looking for a sports hall for space hire for a movie, or I don't know. You might want.
Yeah, I mean, but remember that, you know, there are now, I think this is relevant, although I'm never quite sure. There's now the test suite, right? So if you put an API through a test suite and it's got something that's not in the activity list, and you don't want it to fail because of that reason. So I think we kind of need to broaden the scope of that a little bit more to allow slightly more, you know, edge cases. And as we're saying, it's not so much of an edge case at the moment. I might not be understanding it correctly, but that you know, is an example of the problem that we're facing with these new types of listings.
So I suppose the image certainly tries to address that in the bottom part of the image there, where basically you're tagging the facility type as a type. So there's no activity associated with the space. It's just the facility type and the surface. So the facility type of 7-side football pitch and rugby training pitch are two individual facility types. Those obviously infer an activity, which could be inferred by the link or not, depending if one wanted to use the link. So in terms of a test suite would check in this proposal that everything has a facility type, at least one facility type. And as long as it's got a facility type, then that facility type could be a dance studio, it could be classroom, it could be multi-use games area, it could be seven-a-side football pitch. As long as there's something to describe it, then it would be meeting that requirement of including one. But the proposal here is to drop the activity type from the space. So we don't need to have any activity types referenced for it to pass the test suite.
Okay.
Nick, so at the moment, like we've said, we assign an activity to our spaces currently, which obviously doesn't work with a multi-use space. But what I'm thinking is that we would like to continue doing that without having to assign a facility type. But what I was thinking is internally within Reach, if we were to select the activity type as multi-use space, which I know does not exist in any of the activity lists, but if we were to assign a multi-use space to an activity, then the user would be forced to select a number of facility types for that space. So by that I mean we would have the option of doing one or the other, either assigning an activity or assigning a number of facility types. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering with the activity list assignment, I suppose that's the use case that really interested to get to the bottom of. It's kind of what is the use case for assigning an activity type to a facility if the facility type list includes as the example shows, kind of seven-a-side football pitch, rugby training pitch specifics. Because as Helen's pointed out, if you've got a dance studio, then it's difficult. Facility types works for the simple cases. Sorry, activity types works for the simple cases, but activity types falls down very quickly with anything other than kind of football, basketball, the basics. When you get into dance studios, you get into multi-use spaces, you get into classrooms, you get into space hire generally, anything that's not obvious. And even within basketball spaces, you've got indoor, outdoor, different types of surfaces, things like that. So yeah, I guess I'm just wondering what's the use case for using activity if there was an appropriate option in the facility type list. Would it be easier just to switch that drop down to the facility type list basically and just show options in that?
Well, I mean, if it means one single selection, which is the simplicity of the activity types list, then great. But I mean, if a user needs to select a number of facility types that would match with that activity, then it probably is not the best user experience. Does that make sense? So, for example, if you have a football pitch and you just want to list it as football, you don't particularly. I guess you don't particularly want to say enter in all the different football facility types that you could potentially have, right?
Well, that's a good question. Is it if you had a football pitch, would you actually want to say it's a seven-a-side or a five-a-side pitch? Because without that information, is it useful to list it as a football pitch?
Tom and James, I mean, what's your opinion?
So obviously there's a bit of a middle ground that needs to be found, which is having a facility type list that doesn't go exponentially crazy with all the different variations of seven-a-side, five-a-side, 4.5-a-side, whatever it might look like. It just needs to be fairly high level. So it's where that balance gets struck. From our perspective, the user, if it's I think last time mentioned that I'm in favor of a facility list opposed to using the activity list because it would make more sense in the context of facility space. So Sherv, I wouldn't worry too much about kind of how the user works with it. It's just, I guess, whether there's a subfield from facility type, which then indicates the format of it, whether it's seven-a-side, five-a-side, etc. And then obviously a surface is another subtype. So I guess it's a question of where does the facility type end and then the format start? or the surface start, like within the data hierarchy?
Yeah, so is actually facility types, rather than being a bag of tags, is there a minimal hierarchy there where you've got football pitch, and inside that you've got 7-a-side football pitch, 6-a-side football pitch, well, 5-a-side, whatever, football pitches. Rugby, you've got rugby training pitch, etc. So you've got the rugby pitch as the high level thing, which someone could feasibly be searching for. And then you've got the different formats, as you say, as kind of more detailed version of that. So if you search for rugby pitch, you get all types of rugby pitch. If you search for rugby training pitch, you'd only get those types.
Yeah. So, I think from that perspective, like, I guess looking at it from two different angles, from like a person going directly to one of our customers' websites, they would have like all the sports that they do at that venue, and then they could select, and then blah, 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 it would be potentially handled within the description or some subsequent fields. So that would be fairly straightforward, I guess, in the context of like an activity finder or marketplace. Then they would search for it. It would make sense for them to be able to search or filter at that level. So we need to account for both, right, without overcomplicating the first.
I think also the facilities themselves are generally quite complicated, nuanced things. So we can't necessarily make the the input much simpler than how complicated the thing is in the first place. So, for example, a multi-use hall is an incredibly complicated space in that you could do so many different things in that space, and that complexity has to be represented somewhere, and the best place to represent that is probably at the provider level. But I completely agree that you want to take as many steps as possible to make the data input as easy as possible, and a sort of semi-hierarchical structured list is probably a good way to do that. But this is inherently a complicated problem, and the answer might not be a very simple answer. There might have to be a 1 or 2 steps in here that are slightly complicated or slightly nuanced.
So who on the call is currently maintaining a kind of controlled vocabulary or database table of facility types?
Yeah.
Okay, so how large is that? How complex is that? Anyway.
Well, it's not the same type of we don't completely match facility type on OpenActive, but there are probably, I don't know, 100 different variations.
100 different variations of what's examples of those? Sorry, Jamie.
So I'm thinking different space heights. I'm thinking different types of football pitch, tennis courts. It depends if you're including surface. I'm including surfaces within that 100.
So is that surfaces included as in it's multiplied out? So you've got every type of, let's call it, times by number of surfaces.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we might be looking at kind of 20, 30 core number in the list.
Yeah.
Multiplied by.
Yeah. If you can put the surface type as an additional field, yeah. But that's completely off the top of my head. We need to have a look.
But yeah, it gives us a sense of the magnitude, I guess.
I think
that. Oh, sorry, Tom.
Yeah, sorry, Tim. I was just going to say this on surface seems simple when it's single use, and feel like we're all in agreement with how it should work for single use, but multi-use, that's obviously where there's this complexity that needs to be handled in a way. So would potentially having, like, if, say, from a user experience perspective, they're in, like, a user's putting in, is this multi-use space? Yes. Then what sports, as in tags, could then be where the tags come in there, because there is that many different options, and that's where it could fit well.
That's a really good idea, actually. I also wonder whether it impacts on the price. So, for example, if you have a multi-use space and it can be split into 2 5-a-side pitches or 6 badminton courts, or 1 big basketball court, I don't know, whatever the things are, then would you split the space in terms of, you would have 3 different, for example, the whole space, badminton courts, or 2 halves for the 5-a-side. And then each of those 3 spaces that you might price and put images for or whatever, whether those, you might just then tag each of those with, half the space can be used for 5-a-side football, or half a basketball court, or whatever the other permutations are that half can be used for. Because when you book it, it doesn't just, I mean, you're just booking the space, aren't you? So you might use the basketball hoops in that space when you book that half of the court of the space. But you might book other things, use other things. So I don't know whether is it.
Yeah, because if you have on the multi-use space, the operator then adds, it's going to be a bit of a cumbersome process where there's a load of things they can select from. However, the end user will then be able to navigate to the right space because there are those specific tags that lead to that space being booked in whatever way the end user wants to. I guess that's the trade-off, right?
But it seems to me that what underlies that flow is still a fairly small and not terribly complex bag of tags, or maybe it's a subdivided bag, so it's surface and other and a few generic ones like multi-use or dance studio or whatever. But it seems still handleable without approaching the complexity of, say, the activity list. It doesn't have to be hierarchical. It doesn't have to be deeply nested. It can still be a bunch of tags.
I can't see why surface needs to be in that list. That would, to me, both single use and multi-use be handled separately, right?
So surface might be a different list, yeah.
I would vote for surface being separate.
Yeah, displayed separately.
Yeah.
That will reduce the length of this facility type list quite significantly, I'd suggest. And yeah, it doesn't really fit in line with it being a 7-a-side or a 5-a-side. It's quite a different thing, I'd suggest.
We might also want to have a small hierarchy, just so that you can put football pitch and then the different types of football pitch, 7-a-side formats, etc., under each of the main types, which is different to the way that I suppose the activity list hierarchy. Well, I suppose it's the same as activity list hierarchy. If you're searching for a more specific type of space, you'll go to the specific. If you want just the general, then I suppose you search for the general. So maybe it does mirror the same use, which actually means we can use the same widgets and format, which is handy in terms of we can just, if anyone's using the widget for the activity list, just plug in the facility type list, and then it will look exactly the same. That drop down where you can search for whatever you're looking for, and then for example, the Gladstone system, you can add multiple activities for a particular session. So I guess in the same way, you could add multiple facility types for facility use, and then it's just basically it's a total mirror. The activity list is for sessions and events, and the facility type list is for facility use and slots.
Yeah.
Is that a useful degree of detail to enter into?
What's this? Sorry.
Well, so having that kind of hierarchy, I just don't know whether people think, oh, I don't want a 5-a-side, I want a 7-a-side football pitch.
Yeah, so the alternatives would be either we have generic term football pitch, and then we don't have any linkage, we don't have any detailed terms, or we have the detailed terms without the generic football pitch. So therefore, you must decide which type of football pitch it is, and you can't search for a generic football pitch. Or we have both, and I guess link between them. What might be more difficult is if we have both and don't link them, because then from a kind of usability perspective, you've got this kind of massive list of stuff. And if it's ordered in terms of number, you've got kind of 5-a-side football pitch and 7-a-side, and it's just arbitrary where that stuff is positioned. Whereas if it's under a category, you can kind of more easily find it. don't know if the details are useful though. I mean, people presumably want to search for the 5-a-side football pitch. Would you ever search for just a football pitch and you don't care about the size?
Not
No,
really, no.
They'd
Okay,
always
so we
have
do-
an idea, right?
Okay, so we do need to have that kind of hierarchical representation then.
The data that this is pulling from, if we don't have that data at the moment, so we don't specify, so we have a space that says 3G football pitch, but we haven't specified what's on it. So do we have to go through all spaces and add them in? Is that how this will work?
When you say what's on it, do you mean whether it's 7-a-side or 11-a-side?
Yeah, so if it was to, let's say this was to go live and it just said 3G football pitch, would that be, if it didn't say that it was a 7-a-side or a 5-a-side, would that also be okay?
I think the proposal here is that the level of detail is that it would have at least one facility type tag. So
Okay.
if there was a football pitch tag and that was deemed
Yeah.
useful, then that would be
It
fine.
has to have something below it.
Yeah, but it sounds like what people are saying is that actually a football pitch tag isn't actually that useful. You probably do want it to say 7-a-side football pitch, and we wouldn't want to encourage people to just tag a generic football pitch because that's not helpful.
I think the flexibility is what you want to go for, because with football, that might be true. However, with all the other sports, they're all pretty standard pitch sizes, so it becomes quite cumbersome if they have to like find the specific. It's like tennis or basketball. Mainly, there won't be like 10-a-side or 5-a-side basketball. It seems mainly specific to football, and in some cases where it is a bit of a play as you want, then it's kind of should be within their power to just put football pitch if they want to.
Generic, yeah.
Sure. I see. Yeah, as opposed to basketball, you've got half court and full court, haven't you? Options. So maybe that's similar. Yeah, underneath basketball court.
Well, and I can imagine a lot of organizations having that detail in the description. So, as points currently stand, it gets represented as basketball court for the present, and we're relying on humans scanning the description field to pull out the further information. But we do want the option of specifying that more formally.
Guys, I know this is a super generic comment, but I kind of said it last time, and I think we just need to really err on the side of flexibility. I think there are so many variations to this and different ways people have implemented already, that I think if we can introduce ways to keep it really flexible, then I think that would be helpful to those who've already done that to it, and as well as people who will do work in the future.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense, particularly since it does seem like such a flexible area, as both you and Siv have commented. I guess there's a question of governance, because the activity list, of course, has a fairly heavy governance structure. My instinct is to say that this can be more freeform, because I think a lot of there are organizations representing various activities like NGBs, like branded merchandisers and so on and so forth, that want to have their activities represented in a certain way. I guess that is a less relevant concern for facility types.
Yeah, I think there'll be less in general.
Yeah, okay.
But I agree, it should be open-ended. So like, yeah, if there's new things that come up, then it should be a fairly easy process to add. It was still fairly easy with the activity list from memory.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a JSON structure. So I suppose if an organization wants to add to it, submit a pull request, I guess, modifying that JSON list. And yeah, pick it up on another W3C call or similar. But generally speaking, if the general principle is that more flexibility is good, then we don't have to have too heavy a hand on how we control admission to the list. I guess if it starts turning into another 600 term monster or something, we start getting worried again. But for the moment, it doesn't seem like that's a risk.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, maybe something like just site reference to existing spaces that would meet this criteria or something, in case someone proposes a Quidditch space and we don't know what to do with it.
But yeah, if we've got some kind of lightweight mechanism like pull requests to triage this kind of thing, I think that'll be sufficient for the moment. Okay, it's all very flexible, which is great. Certainly keeps complexity out of OpenActive itself, which is great from my perspective. Any other questions? Any other comments at this point? We've got 5 minutes.
Just one from me is it clear enough on the spec, do you think, the difference between the activity type and the facility use and things like that?
You mean the way we document this? Or
Yeah. So I'm just trying to find where the facility type is on the opportunity spec, and I don't think it is mentioned in there, unless
it's not. It's a beta field. That's why it's described on the facility types has its own list, which is
yeah.
I'll ping it in the chat.
So is that possibly, because I know a lot of people look at the opportunity data spec and they look at the booking spec, but if the facility type isn't even mentioned on the opportunity data spec, might that just confuse people who are looking to build around that?
Well, I suppose I was going to say there's two things. One is that the documentation includes beta fields currently. So if you're a developer.openactive.io and you look at a facility use, you can see the facility type in there. That's where we've been pointing people to who are in the middle of implementing. So there are fields. Yeah, there are new fields since the modeling spec was released a couple of years ago that are all mentioned. So that, as opposed to a general problem that is solved in that way at the moment.
Okay.
And then I suppose more specifically in terms of the spec itself, it might be we want to consider facility type for the next point version of the modeling spec, which I suppose is more a question for Tim.
Yeah, I mean, it's a more substantial change than a lot of other things that are going in, but it's also more urgent and seems like very, very broadly applied. So I think that would be a strong candidate for inclusion. Yeah. Prioritize this one. I also think like we have a solid answer to it, which is which is, makes it fairly easy. So I guess that's the action. Get this written up formally for integration into the next release. And Nick, what's your sense of the state of the current facility type list? How much more curation does it need?
Oh, it's not appropriate right now. It's mainly a surface list. I think if you were to tag everything in the facility type list right now with the surface, probably somewhere near. And then maybe there's a few additions I think Nish put earlier in the thread, and I know maybe some other people have said some things in this thread. So, and there's we've also got on the last call there was a couple of curated lists sent through from I think Tom and Jamie on the email. So we probably just need to do a bit of a kind of pulling together of the various lists from various places to make sure that it's not just a surface type list. And I know that, for example, MCR Active have an interest in this. They I mean, the same problem everyone's got about the list. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that'll be interested to check that their use case is accounted for within the list that gets produced.
Okay, so the other action is synthesize list from submitted lists, and yeah, okay. Which seems, I mean, I would imagine that'll conform to the 80-20 rule, that whatever, gets collated right now covers most use cases, and then the tricky border cases will remain.
Well, I imagine, for example, we're doing a bit of an exercise to check that everything that is in the school space system has a appropriate term to link to. So if there's any gaps, they'll be easy to flag. And I imagine as other systems start to implement, it'll be the same.
Okay, a clear plan of action and a conclusion. Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will meet again in a couple of weeks, I hope. And yeah, in the meantime, progress so that facility type's actually an actionable thing prior to getting it included into the next point release.
Thanks,
Great.
guys.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.